and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for painting with me today. It's getting a little cold outside, so we are celebrating our little cold weather with our little winter friends. We're going to go step by step together today. However, as we go along, if you want to change any of the colors on this one, definitely can. So if you want a different color scarf or sky or birdie friend, you can definitely switch those colors out. Speaking of colors, let's take a look at which colors we have today. So in this little plate here, this top plate, this empty plate, is going to be our mixing plate, and we have some little cups of color. I scooped out a little of that color and then I put that on that empty plate. So we have black and white, green, brown, kind of a reddish brown, a dark yellow, a red, an orange, and a blue. We'll also need a cup of water to wash off our brushes and a paper towel to dry off our brushes. Make sure you put that little brown paper that your kit was wrapped in underneath your canvas so that nothing else gets painted around in your space. And lastly, we'll need some paintbrushes. I always like to grab a large brush, kind of a medium brush, and a small brush for details, but we're going to start with our biggest brush that we have. We're going to use our biggest brush for our biggest space. So we're going to paint our background in, our sky in to start. Let's get our big brush, let's give it a little dip in the water, get things flowing. We'll tap on the paper so it's not all drippy. And we're going to mix up our sky color. I did a really light green, but if you wanted to do a really light blue, definitely could. So for that, I'm going to get a good scoop of white and put that off to the side. I'm going to get a little bit of green and I'm going to do little mixes until you get a nice kind of minty green color that I like. Yours can be a little lighter than mine, a little darker than mine. That's okay. Whenever you get a good color, we're going to start filling in all of our sky. I'm going to start doing nice long brush strokes. I'm going to go around those little lines, around those little edges. Smooth out your paint. Take it nice and slow. Gonna fill in all of our background. Okay, so Whenever you have all of your background filled in, while we have that color still on our brush, we're also going to paint our little side edges to match. So we're going to bring that all the way around and paint all 4 of our side edges. If you want to leave a little spot at the very bottom blank for now for our little deer color right here, you can leave that spot open and fill in everything else. Okay, so once we have all of our side edges filled in, we have all of our background filled in, we're gonna let that dry a little bit and let's work on our deer colors. So I'm gonna start with this lighter color first, and that one is going to be this dark yellow and white. I did wash off my big brush and I dried it off, so it's nice and clean now. I'm gonna get a little scoop of white paint and put that next to my dark yellow, and I'm gonna do a little bit of yellow into that big little scoop of white, so you get like a nice creamy color that you like. And this color we're gonna use right here on the body. Going around the scarf. While this color is on your brush, if you left a little spot open for that little part underneath on your side edge, we can fill that in. And then we are also going to fill in these little spots where the eyes are and that little space inside the ear. So I'm gonna get a little bit more paint on my brush. I'm gonna fill in, you can go right over that little dot. You'll be able to see it still, don't worry. Fill in that little space inside the ear. If you want to use a smaller brush for that part, go for it. It's a little tough with this big brush. Okay, let's wash off our brush. So I washed off my brush and I dried off my brush, and I'm going to fill in this color next. So, just like we did for the yellow, I'm going to get a little bit of white, and then I'm going to put it over here by that reddish brownish color, kind of like a brick red. And a good amount of color in there mixed up. Scratch off a little of that extra paint. And we're going to fill in all this little forehead space, and then the tops of our ears also. Take it nice and slow, smooth out your paint. Cool, so we have center of our head. We're gonna let that dry a little bit. I'm gonna wash off my brush, dry off my brush. I think I'll just use my big brush for one more little piece, and that is the scarf. So I'm gonna do a red scarf. I did wash off my brush, dried off my brush. I'm gonna grab a little bit of red. And I'm gonna fill in all my scarf color. Okay, so let's let that dry for a little while. Later on we'll put some designs on it once it's a little bit more dry. But while we're letting those dry, let's go back up here to our sky that we're in. So we're gonna add some little clouds over here. And we actually don't need a brush for this step. We just need our finger. So we're gonna get our finger, we're gonna get a little bit of white paint. A little bit of white paint on your finger. And I'll show you a couple ways. So a little bit of paint on your finger. So first way is kind of scratchy little circles. So we're gonna go circle, circle, circle. A little bit more, circle, circle, circle. A little bit thicker in the middle, like a little poofier in the middle, and then kind of thin at the edges, kind of flat on that bottom edge, but kind of roundy at the top. A little flat at the bottom, kind of pointy at the edges. And then you can also do tappy clouds. So tap, 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 tap. Also makes nice little fluffy clouds. But same way, kind of a little roundy at the top, kind of flat at the bottom, and thin on the ends. You get some nice little poofy clouds. You can put as many or as few as you want. Okay, so we have some nice little clouds in our sky. I'm gonna find a small brush, so find one of your smaller brushes, and we're gonna put on kind of the trunk of the tree, just so that it has a little time to dry before we put on the little pine needles for a little Christmas tree or little pine tree. So again, I'm gonna find one of my smaller brushes, and I'm gonna darken up my brown just a little bit. So I'm gonna get a tiny bit of black. I'm just kind of like scratching it a little bit. And then on the edge of my brown, I'm gonna mix in a little bit of that black. So I get like a nice melty chocolate brown. We're gonna use this for the horns also in just a little bit here. But let's do our tree first. So I have a little bit of dark brown off to the side. And I'm gonna start out by just making a little stick. So I'm gonna start right here at the very bottom. I'm going up, book, maybe about a little underneath that ear. And then we're gonna kind of add to it a little bit. So at the very bottom, I'm gonna make it a little wider, because trees look the most tree when they kind of go thick to thin. So we're gonna go thick at the bottom, then at the top. So bring this a little closer. I'm gonna start here at the bottom. I'm gonna go a little off to the side, maybe about there. I'm gonna follow it right to the edge of that first line. I'm gonna fill it in. Don't worry if it's not super thick, if you're seeing a little bit of your background showing through, because we're gonna put all those bristles on top. So we're mostly just gonna see this little bottom part. So if we need to let it dry a little bit more, touch it up, maybe after we do our horns, we can. Just let it dry a little bit. So we should have our center of our tree. Now while we have that dark brown on our brush, let's fill in our little antlers next. If you want a little bit lighter brown, you can use the brown by itself, but I'm gonna use this dark brown. And I'm gonna fill in my horns. I have my small brush still. Just take it nice and slow. Drag your brush along. You can cover over those black lines, those Sharpie lines. Smooth out your paint, just a little paint at a time. Whenever it gets a little scratchy, get a little bit more paint instead of pressing harder. That'll keep you from going too far out of a line. And do the other side. Cool, so we have some horns. Let's make our little bird over here. We're gonna fill in our bird with a color. We'll let it dry and then add those little details next, or in a little bit. So I'm gonna make a little blue bird, a little red bird, or an orangey bird. Definitely can. And do a little bit of blue, just by itself, and just a little blue just by itself. I'm gonna fill in that little circle. And cover over those lines. We fill in the little head and the little tail. Gonna let this dry a little while. We'll add on that beak and wing and eyeball. Let's let that dry. Okay, so we are gonna go back to our little forehead and we're gonna add that little bit of fur texture, and we'll go around those edges a little bit, so going all around. So for that I'm gonna stick with my smallest brush and I'm gonna grab a little of this kind of reddish brownish color just by itself this time, just by itself. And for the little hairs on the forehead, I'm gonna find the smallest part of my brush, the thinnest part of my brush, and I'm gonna make kind of little dashes. Let's start in the middle. So a little dash, like little lines. I'm gonna keep making them to the side till I get kind of underneath the ear. I'll do the same on the other side till I get underneath the ear. Let's load up our brush with a little bit more, and we're gonna make some more rows, just like that. So let's keep starting in the middle. And then we're gonna sweep them along to the side, sweep them along to the side. Next row. See how they're kind of tilting to the side as they get a little further out. So they're not all straight up and down. The ones up towards the edges are a little bit more tilted maybe. Do a few down here and a couple down here. While I have that color on my brush, I'm also going to take it around all the edges on my deer. So I'm going to follow those edges. I'm kind of painting a little bit more on top of my deer color right here than on the background. So I'm not on my background color, I'm on top of my deer color when I'm going around those edges that are touching the background. These center parts, don't have to worry too much about those. And it's okay to have kind of a thicker outline. I think that kind of adds a lot to it. We're gonna follow the little face. Again, I'm a little bit more on top of that light yellow, kind of tan color, not so much on the green background color. So So I'm kind of following the little Sharpie line, kind of half on the Sharpie line, half on the yellow, following it along. Cool, so we have little edges all around. Let's fill in our nose and our eyes just so it has lots of time to dry before we put that little shine on, because it doesn't really stick very well if it's still a little wet. So we're gonna fill in the nose with black and then we're gonna let it dry. Don't put that white stripe on there or that little shine yet. We need to let it dry a little bit. So I'm gonna do eyeballs too. I'm using my small brush. I washed it off, I dried it off. I'm gonna get a little bit of black paint, just a little bit. It's a small space, don't need much. And I'm gonna fill in my nose. Smooth it out. Spread it out. Go over those lines. Nice. And then for those little eyeballs, instead of using the brushy part of the brush, I'm gonna flip my brush around and use the back handle, and that's gonna give me a nice little dot. So I'm gonna dip my brush into black right there, and I'm gonna do a press and a lift on each little dot. So press, lift, press, lift. Same on the birdie, bump right there. Press, lift, right behind the beak. If you need to make that eye a little bit bigger, when you press, you can wiggle it around a little bit before you lift, and that'll make it a little bit bigger, but still a nice little circle, like that. Okay, so let's let that dry. I think our treat is ready for some leaves on it. So this color is going to be a little darker green. I'm going to stick with my small brush, we're using that one a lot, and I'm going to mix up mostly green and a little bit of brown. So a little bit of brown into all that green to get a nice kind of forest green, maybe a little darker green, till it kind of changes colors and it's not so bright. Mix in a little bit of that brown, nice dark green. Scratch off your brush. So for our leaves, we're gonna kind of go down and out, down and out. So let's start, we're gonna kind of make like an arrow pointing up. So what I mean by that is we're gonna start here and we'll go down and out, down and out. So it's kind of like a big arrow pointing up, right? So these are gonna be my smallest leaves. I'm gonna keep sweeping. I'm gonna do one side at a time. So I'm gonna do all this side first, and then I'm growing it. It's getting a little bit wider as I go down. All the way down. And you can cover up that middle part. You can overlap your brush strokes, that's okay. And then I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. If you're right-handed, doing this side is a little harder. But don't worry, we're just gonna sweep it out, down, out, down, out. You can always go a little smaller than you think you may need and kind of fluff it out as needed. Later on, we'll put some little snow on this. Cool. So I also added a little bit of brown by itself in there. If you want, you can definitely add that. If you don't want to, don't have to. And I feel like adding this little bit of brown kind of helps it tie it to that center, the center kind of trunk of the tree, or the middle of the tree. So I'll put a few little sweeps of brown, just kind of amongst the green. And it just kind of ties it together a little bit more. It's like maybe there's little sticks in there. You're just kind of seeing the sticks. Or branches, rather. Little branches. There we are. Let's let that dry for a while. So we're letting this dry, and still using my small brush. And let's go back over here to our little birdie friend, and let's give him a little beak. I'm gonna use a little bit of orange. If you want to do a yellow, you can do that yellow by itself, maybe. I'm gonna do an orange. There's just a tiny little space. You don't need much. Just that little guy, and the little feet, the little tiny feet. Just two little lines. Just go right over them. If your orange is like really see-through and you're not liking that, let it dry a little bit and we can mix in a little bit of white into that orange and go over it. The white makes things opaque so you can't see through them if you need. Okay, so we're getting towards our last little steps. I think everything else are just little sweeps of white. We're gonna do a lot of little steps of white though. So let's go over here to our little chest, like the little hairs on the tummy part right there. Let's put those on, and we'll do a couple of highlights on the face. So let's do that next. I have my smallest brush again. I washed it off, dried it off, and I'm gonna get a little bit of white, and just like we did on the forehead, bring this a little closer. We're gonna do kind of little dashes. So I'll start in the middle. Do little dashes. We'll do another little row. I'm gonna put a little bit more in the middle than on the outside. That'll give it a nice little highlight in the center. Make it look a little bit more round. So while you have that white on your brush, we're gonna put a little sweep of white on those cheeks. So I'm going to go right up here, kind of right inside of your outline. I'm gonna follow it, and that little guy, and I'm gonna go right there on that little guy. And then we're gonna add on that little highlight next. So next round of little highlights. Let's add that little highlight on top of the ears. It's like a little light shining on those little ear tops. So again, right inside of the line of that outline that we did. Just a little sweep. I'm gonna do that a little bit on tops of the antlers because again, the light is shining down and it's just catching a little bit on the tops of things. So I'm just gonna sweep a little bit at a time. If you don't want to add one of these little highlights, don't have to. Take a look at my and then see if you want to. Don't have to if you don't want. Put a little bit here, kind of the tops of things. Wherever you think the sun might be shining on. Yeah. There we go. And we're also gonna do just a tiny bit on the bird for the wing. So for the wing, I'll bring that a little closer. I'm gonna do kind of like a little curve, a curve forward. So it's gonna be kind of like that shape. So it curves forward, be the front of the wing. So I'm gonna start maybe in the middle, curve forward, back. Once you have that little shape, I'll put just like a couple behind it. If you want, you can add a little floops in the tail, a little shine on the head maybe. Might be nice. So let's fill in the little design on our scarf there. I'm gonna do some little stripies, but if you wanna do like polka dots, zigzags, if you wanna write something like a word, definitely could. I'm gonna kind of follow this one, and I'm just noticing that I'm missing a pom-pom, so I'm gonna put that on there too. So I'm gonna kind of follow with that little curve on the side. It makes it a little bit more like it's soft fabric. Wrap it around. There's a little neck because he's chilly, because it's cold outside. It's snowing. And put a little on that one. I'm gonna add on these little stripies here. Going side to side, they're a little wiggly. Let's add that pom-pom. So, good trick for a bigger dot. You can use your finger into a little bit of your red. Press, give it a little wiggle and a lift. Let's let that dry, and then we'll put a little highlight on there too in just a few minutes. And then let's add on our snow. So I'm gonna add a little snow at the very bottom over here. So like our snow has fallen, it's down under here, under our tree, and over here, under our little bird friend. So I'm gonna get a little bit more white on my brush part, and we're just gonna tap it on. So I'm gonna go all the way down to the very, very bottom, do little taps. Keep getting more paint on your brush there. Get a thick paint. Kind of uneven edges, look nice. Bring it all the way down to the very, very bottom. Get a little bit on there. Let's gonna put a little bit more brown. I'm gonna go underneath my tree. Little squishes, little taps. Lots of paint. The more paint, the fluffier it'll look. The more texture, which looks nice. And then I'm gonna add a little bit to my tree. So a little bit less on my brush this time, just so you can kind of like control how much. Do little taps. I'll take it a little slower. Kind of thinking about where it's gonna fall a little bit more. I'm gonna have a lot at the very top because that's where it's catching. It's a little less as it falls down along the tree. Maybe it catches on some of those other little branches also. Goes down here. You can do as little or as much as you like. So our last little highlights, last little steps of white. We're gonna do a little sweep of white on the nose. I'm still using my small brush. I'm gonna do kind of a little half circle on top of the nose because the light is shining on top of the nose. Just a little bit. If you have bigger eyes, we can also add a little sparkle in those eyes too. We're gonna go back to the back handle, tiny bit of white paint, and do dot in each eye. My example doesn't have that, but since I made kind of bigger eyes, I'll put those on there. You can do the same on the bird if you want. Tiny little shine. And then if this guy is dry enough, we can do a little C shape in there. Very cool. I think it is all done. Our last little step is always to add our artist signature. Usually right hand bottom corner is the artsy place to put it. So I like to put my initials, but if you want to put your whole name, if you want to put the date, if you want to put it on the side or on the back, that's okay too. These are so cute, guys. We are ready for the winter times. We have our cute little friends. We need to find a really good place for this up on the wall now. Thank you so much for painting with me today, and we shall see you next time. Bye, guys.